Hello and welcome to Highly Informed. I'm your host, Shaun Salvaje. Highly Informed is all about entheogenic education and news you can use when it comes to the world of cannabis and psychedelics. We are wrapping up our final day of MJ Biz. If you're staying through the weekend, you're a brave soldier.
It better be the final day.
Yes, it is. It is our final. We're having a hard time counting, but it's been wonderful. It's like priceless. It's countless.
Day 1, part 2.
Yes. Yeah, day 1, part 7 or something.
Yeah, no, seriously, actually.
I'm joined today by Miyabe Shields. Miyabe, thank you so much for coming out. Miyabe has her PhD in drug discovery, and she's a co-founder of the Network of Applied Pharmacognosy.
Got it. With
our very own Riley Kirk, who you guys saw earlier in the season. Now we've got Miyabe in studio. Miyabe, how's your MJ Biz been so far?
It was great. I think it's really interesting because this is my third one, and a lot has changed like quickly over time. And it was the first one really where we were reporting things from the nonprofit that had been going on all year. And it was really exciting because we don't get together with everyone. I mean, there really is not a time when so many people are overlapping. And the two things that I love about MJ Biz that I absolutely love and embrace are the first one we were talking about is like just the density of scientists and the exchange of information that you can get from people in the industry all coming together and like having that co-localization and that synergy of being like, how can we take our projects to the next level together and doing that in person? And the second thing is that a lot of legacy shows up, not necessarily at the con, but around.
And this year, though, there was more opportunity to build a bridge with the introduction of the vault, which gave, people who are more on the legacy side tend to be more on the cultivation side, more in genetics and the old school ways of getting the plant to survive all the way up through today. So it was pretty cool to see that. Did you get a chance to go to the vault?
I went by it, but I wasn't able actually to see. I didn't see any single talk. I went to the floor. I went to the floor to have a meeting. I had an accidental meeting on the way to another meeting, and then shot over to
That's kind of the best way with MJ Biz is the accidental meeting. So
it is the stumble upon.
You get here and you have like your plan of attack, everyone who you want to talk to. But one thing that I found over the last few nights is sometimes life just kind of organically happens. And without trying to force it, all the people who I needed to see magically appeared at some point. There was one point I was in a random hotel. Like, it's not that random. It's at a hotel on the strip. But I'm at a hotel. I'm not expecting to see someone. We kind of understood we probably wouldn't run into each other through the week because we were going in different directions. And I'm in the middle of the elevator. And with this random group, that turns out they're from MJ Biz. They're here for that too. And the doors part, and lo and behold, it's the person that I wasn't expecting to see. It was Ryan from American Weed Co. It was actually kind of an amazing thing because he was wearing this green crushed velvet jacket, and they had just won an MJ, so he was like glowing. And it's just one of those moments where you're enjoying the moment that you're in, you're very present. I was having a great time. We're just in the elevator, just connecting with total strangers because I'm one of those weirdos who will talk to you in an elevator. Doors part, and there's Ryan.
In his green jacket. Coming fresh off an MJ win. Like, everyone who you needed to see showed up when you least expected it. And it was just so beautiful to have the doors open, to see someone I wasn't expecting, and then to connect and have that organic moment. It feels like, yes, you can definitely chase the high, but you don't have to out here because there's so much room for opportunity and synchronicity. How has it been for NAP? Like, tell me about the Trade Association Day or Associations Day. Yeah.
And tell me about, like, what's getting NAP's network all fired up?
So there's a lot of the Associations Day was great. I think that a lot of people, specifically in the community, public health, public benefit, and like nonprofit space in cannabis, like clearly we share a lot of the very core passions about. I mean, almost all exclusively have like a medical component, or at least some version of like quality, some version of like consumer and patient prioritized And to have that density of that many people, and then to see how many people from the industry showed up for us to like see us, see what we're doing, like talk to us. And I think for me, it was a really powerful thing. You know, I am very well connected with other advocates in the space, and we see each other all the time, and we love what each other's doing. But getting to get there and say, like, you know, shake someone's hand and be like, I love what you do, and I love that you're here showing up, and I'm here showing up physically. And something I want to say about the whole, like, you know, mysticism and the synchronicity of coming about. Like, I think it's interesting as a scientist that we focus so much on the average when, for example, like, if we think about the number of decisions, and it's not complete randomness that I'm sitting in this chair at this time, right? There were a good number of decisions that were conscious. And then you get into the question of how much of our brain thought is actually truly conscious versus subconscious. We don't know. But let's just say for clarity that clearly I've made decisions that have led to me being here. And you've made decisions that have led to you being here. How many of those decisions that we have to make a certain way so that we're both sitting here? I mean, maybe there's a few different instances that we're sitting here, but we wouldn't be the same people if any of those decisions were different. So that means that this universe that we're existing in is an anomaly. It's a statistically minute chance that we would both be sitting here at the same time. And I feel like it's interesting with mysticism, or in the concept of mysticism, with synchronicity too, where it's like, it feels spontaneous and rare because we're so trained to think about the average, when in reality, like, everything is spontaneous and rare because this universe that we exist in right now is the only one right now, but it's out of an infinite number of possibilities. And I really like that. I've felt that in this I mean, in terms of like NAP, and what was getting me excited about it is honestly like is how people feel about our research. I love being in the industry and seeing my friends and talking about all the science. I love seeing all the things. I love the spectacle. Also, I like Vegas. It's fun. It's very, very fun. It's very fun to go out and have so much fun with your friends while also working. And then at the same time, it's like there's so much that's getting done, right? And it's this like very interesting mix of relaxing and having fun, being productive, and in terms of like the spontaneity or the mysticism of things coming about, I think that's natural and makes sense when there's such a density of people who manifest and who also like are thinking more deeply about their lives and their intentions and what they're doing. And I think that in general, the cannabis and psychedelic space, you know, are different populations, but in general, it seems lean towards mysticism.
Yeah, but I love how in the concept of mysticism, you broke down the science of the anomaly and the statistical odds. Okay, on that tangent, then, what are some of the really cool anomalies or interesting little factoids or discoveries that you found, not just from NAP, but from other people as you were exploring the floor, getting to know other folks? What's out there? What's going on? Without revealing anybody's, you know, proprietary information.
And without revealing like anything like personal from
obviously,
other people.
yeah.
But like, I think so. One of the most interesting things that I've been talking a lot about was about. I've been looking at one of the things that NAB has recently analyzed and published was CDC data. It's a white paper and it's out on our website. And so the U.S. government does a national analysis on a survey of drug use, and it's called the NSDU, the National Survey on Drug Use and Health or something. And I think it's funded by the CDC. So the 2022 data set has like 47,100 results on it. There's a lot of adults, and it's been analyzed a certain way to look at cannabis users a certain way, to look at daily cannabis consumers a certain way, and to look at addiction and substance use. And there's these infographics that come from that data set that are they certainly aren't pro-cannabis, right? And it's interesting because you could take that same data set. So we took that same raw data set and just analyzed it with different parameters and analyzed it with a different light, and then can have completely different data come out of it, where instead of looking at the number of cannabis consumers who consume daily and saying like, wow, okay, 5% of the general population consumes cannabis 6 out of 7 days a week, at least, or something like that. You know, wow, that's a lot. Those people must be addicted. They must have a problem, right? Instead of looking at it from that lens, let's say, hey, let's look at that 5% of the population that does consume cannabis 6 out of 7 days a week. Actually, statistically, according to this data from the federal government, we experience higher psychological stress in general, especially in the more severe categories on the Kessler distress scale, we experience more higher levels of disability impairment as a result of that psychological distress. So now those two factors go into an identifier. If you score above a certain threshold, they call it mental illness, but like we'll call it neurodivergence, like neurodivergent daily cannabis consumers. Now, that made up almost 50% of this government data set. And then in our longitudinal data set, it was 71% of what was daily consumers identified as neurodivergent. So that was self-identified versus this, the government data one was analyzed from their results. And what you see with the government information is there's a couple of things. The first one is that when it comes to challenges with self-care, being unable to care for yourself and having a challenge like meeting your daily needs, it was like general population, and then it was like daily consumers of cannabis. You saw like a jump up, and then it was like neurodivergent, where it was like almost 20%, almost 1 out of every 5 neurodivergent daily cannabis consumers struggles with self-care. At least in some concept. 1 out of 5 is a lot. And it actually helped me feel like less bad about that. And I think and then the other part about it is overall health. So the general population is overall healthy. It goes excellent, very good, fair, poor. And the average American adult is very healthy. It leans over to here. And then for daily cannabis consumers, there's like a slight shift over here. It's like, oh no, in general, you're just not quite as well. And then when you do the neurodivergent daily cannabis consumers, there's a shift even further over, like, oh no, And so I feel like one of the things that I was really excited about, and tons of the conversations that I have are towards things that people really are excited to talk to me, like with me about, but there's so many people exploring their personal experimentation with formulations and neurodivergence. There's so many people experimenting combinations of things that I'm very interested in. Let me say, do as I say, not as I do. Is that what I'm trying to say? Not a doctor. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a scientist.
And we don't give any there's no legal or medical advice here at Highly Informed.
No. And
just news you can use, like we said.
Just information on things that can help affect other people's lives. So I'm just going to share what I do. But one thing I got really excited about is I love hearing from the community what everyone else is doing, because the general public is becoming much more educated about rare cannabinoids, terpenes, flavorants, other aromatic profiles, strain specificity, and like genetics. Like even just in general, like it is growing, it's evolving, and like we have come from a point of propaganda and no information, and we're moving towards having more of this public education, and like I'm seeing it actually. And there's tons of people coming up with like very specific and intentional uses and developments of how they utilize cannabis throughout their day, or different like combinations of such. And like it's fascinating because every single person that's doing that is doing an experiment. And so again, for what works for me, like I generally don't lean towards very high THC, and I like to mix and balance everything with hemp, with CBD, and with CBG. And it's not like I won't enjoy just a THC flower now and then, or especially when I'm like, hanging out with friends socially. But my like main thing that really helps me is to have a more balanced just like formulation, something that's like mellow and like laid out. And that's not for everyone. And it's for some people, it's like at a certain time, and other people you can modify it and make it your own. And I think it's really, really interesting because the more people start doing that, we start to like realize these like little bits of anomalies of things where, because we're the ones that are self-reporting. And as daily cannabis consumers, as a daily cannabis consumer, and as someone who like is very conscious about like what I do and why, and like trying to think about that was the number one thing that helped me get to a better place with my medicine, was truly the understanding and breaking down of all these different concepts that were really a lot to learn because we've been withheld from that information when we should have learned it when we were younger, when it was easier for us to learn. Yeah. Like, I mean, right. I feel like that could have been.
We had a little more plasticity.
Yes. Like we missed out kind of on that. And then
to an extent, although they're finding that plasticity can be developed over time, it can be trained. Like,
I believe that. Yeah. Because I love learning new things. It's one of like the most fun. Actually, I mean, this is a very standard like neurodivergent thing to be like, I love a new thing. And then you're like doing it, you're everything. I was like macro photography. I'm like, I'm going to get a focus rail. Like I want to do this. And then it's like, you're just like, you're really, really, really into it. And that like, that hyper focus. I think that that's really interesting too. People tend to say that neurodivergent brains lean like young, or like that, like, and it sometimes leads to like infantilization, which is like a whole nother issue of like treating someone who's neurodivergent younger, even if because of maybe like you give up like a younger vibe, even though you're like older, like. Because of your mannerisms, because of social atypicalities, like because of like maybe sensory things and what you wear, like any combination of those things.
I think that's one of the nice things about MJ Biz and this whole week of gathering everybody from cannabis here is that you get to see the diversity of experience, the diversity of expression, much like the plant. And you see it all kind of come together. And I really don't see too often any kind of segmentation based on superficialities. It's really like everyone can be mixed in and it's based on like, well, are you in cultivation or are you in processing or are you manufacturing? And even then there's still some there's a lot of crossover in cannabis.
All love weed. Like, no, we really do. Like, and that thing that, so we have a shared special interest.
Bringing us all together.
Like, definitely. And a lot of us in the industry, like, I'm not going to say all of us because I feel like it is a majority of us who really love the plant, who really are in the industry for life because of your love for the plant, because of your access to the other people who love the plant as the community. Like that is something that's unparalleled in any other industry for me, is to have and work in an industry that's full of people who spiritually connect to a medicine that saved my life, and that no matter what, in any space that I'm in at this conference, like, and I'm not saying that I'm getting along with every single person, every single space. You would never do that, but no matter what, in most of these spaces, I'm going to find someone else that's going to like light up, and that is a comforting thing for me because I feel like there's this shared understanding, and the cannabis community just has around, like, I mean, especially being marginalized, especially understanding that component of how the stigma of cannabis is still around. Like, we all share these experiences together. We're all in the industry together, and it's not an easy one to be in, but it's one that we love to be in because we love the plant and we love the people, and it's hard. The industry is neurodivergent.
Well, speaking of, okay, so this is your third MJ Biz. I'm kind of curious, looking back on, if you were gonna talk to Miyabe, who came to her first one, first of all, would you have predicted where you are now? And secondly, what would you tell Miyabe then?
It's because one.
It's very clear you've grown a lot. It's very clear you guys have grown a lot.
Yeah, it's. I think it's interesting because the first MJ Biz that I went through was like, honestly, like one of the first events that I went to ever since even starting to like do public education and create content and everything. And I got recognized in Planet 13 when I was just like buying weed, and it was like very, very strange and surreal situation. And like, and it's, I think it's incredible and really amazing. Also, if anyone ever sees me, I actually get it kind of often where people will be like, I saw you and I didn't want to come say hi or like whatever. It's like, no, I really do enjoy talking to people. I think it's really, I don't always have the time to be able to have like the fullest conversation, but I love to hear from people, like, and it's really awesome. And the first MJ Biz I came to, I remember being a little bit scared of that. Like, I felt very, very scared and affronted because it had never happened to me before. And I was like
being approached,
just like being recognized by my face. And like it being real, that like I am very recognizable also, just like I feel like generally speaking, like the tattoos. It is kind of strange,
I would imagine, when you like put yourself so out there,
and it's very personal.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, so like that was, and then it kind of, I feel like it kind of has evolved, and what it's evolved to even more too is like our work has evolved into these spaces. Is like a lot of these relationships and stuff, like people have grown in the same way. A lot of us have been going through a lot of the, we're not going through the same things. Like everyone is navigating their own life with their own challenges, clearly. But we've all been going through a lot too together, like as an industry, as
the last
community.
I would say the last 5 years since the pandemic have been some pretty important ones. The pandemic created such a unique opportunity for the industry to grow at a rapid pace when it was like determined an essential good. But now, 5 years later, that initial like big burst, that bubble of activity even though you would think it would have been the opposite, being locked down, but no, people needed to have what was determined an essential good. It eventually tapers off and you get to where we are now. Looking back on the last 5 years, what surprised you the most?
I mean, I think the thing that surprises me the most, and that still surprises me the most, is that people that me sharing my experiences about my life is not uncommon. And that still surprises me. It was really a sad thing, and I had to kind of like learn and study how therapists separate themselves from people from like their from like feeling having boundaries around that.
Compartmentalize a bit.
Yeah, because like carrying all of that weight and pain of like all the people that are very similar to me in their own way and their own flavors, it's not a small number of people. It is a lot. It's a lot of people, and it's shocking because I always thought that it was just me, and that's kind of what everyone says.
I love that. There's so many times when we're walking through the world and we really feel like we're alone in our isolation, and then you stop and you listen to someone else's story and you realize like, oh, you too? And the more you do that, stop and listen, the more you can tap into the fact that, wait a minute, this thing that I thought was so uniquely to my experience, not because it's so unique to your experience because you're a little too hard on yourself or, chastising in the worst ways. Like we are our own worst critics. And when we can come to the conversations where we feel like we can be more open and we feel like we can be more transparent because we realize we're not alone, it's then that we start to see it's not just a matter of not being alone. It's actually in what your dad is revealing. There's actually these large populations that have gone unrecognized or unstudied. Like what is...
I would say we've been studied, but just like under a very different lens.
Ooh,
like we've always
under
been
a misunderstood framework.
How about under a pathology or like a disease-based model when there's no evidence that there's a disease here at play at all, and if anything, there's just either like a trauma or other underlying vulnerabilities, social vulnerabilities, often like.
What is
combined.
it about academics and science that tend to lead us to that level of diagnostic or determining that it's a pathology and a problem that's what's at play? Like how does that kind of come about from what you've experienced?
That is a really, really difficult question.
Super.
Yeah,
I know. I'm wanting you to solve like world peace next.
Well, okay. So I mean, that might be easier than. No, there's really just like a lot of factors at play for why this is. I mean, we look at the history of psychiatry just in general is not great, and we've never really. Like, I don't know how to say this without being like, so negative about my own field. Like so I'm a pharmaceutical scientist. I studied drug discovery in the endocannabinoid system, and I love the field of research that I do. I'm a huge nerd for it, and I do think that it's valuable. It has huge value to understand. At the same time, like, it is removed from what like the research that I can do, and that's very cool, and that I love looking at atomic scale stuff. It is removed from like the real like medical and therapeutic benefits of the plant in some ways, and I feel like being able to integrate that and the community knowledge and the oral tradition, that component, like if I were to say where did that come from? You say, where does the stigma in science come from just in general, right? And it's that it's a culture where it's like, okay, you labeled an addict, you label a problem, you're lesser than. It's a hierarchy. So these are like social hierarchies, like upholding social hierarchies.
And that's kind of the only choice you have when we're looking at every problem as it's a pathology. Like.
Right. Like we're looking at it saying we need to cure this issue and not saying like, what is the environment that's leading to this issue? Can you
break that down for anybody who's not quite like understanding what do you mean by pathology? Pathology
is used to just mean like a disease state, like something that is sick, something that needs to be cured. And an example of something that's like that is clear needs to be eradicated, right, is like infections or something, right? Now, but when we say of a pathology like a sickness, like we did used to say that like people who had substance use disorders or something, I struggled with this, like it's like, so I know some people still adhere to the idea that this is like a disease of your brain and that you need, et cetera. But like, honestly, biologically, biochemically, like what a disease in your brain, like, yeah, maybe dysregulations and stuff, but like, that's not a disease. Like, it's a trauma response, or like, most likely, or any other number of reasons why your functionality might your processing might be different and not lesser. It doesn't have to mean lesser. A lot of times you can be different. I think that, like, here's a perfect example. I think a lot of people think that I am intellectually fast. Now, I have appreciated that in my life, and I certainly have benefited from being really quick at thinking, right? Like, I think really quickly. That's great. But it's great until you're up in your head racing around, and there's like a million thoughts, and it's terrible.
Running
it's
in circles.
Right. Like, there are pros and cons of every side and every sword. The idea that there's a pathology, meaning like a sickness that's caused by people who are weak, right? Like, some people, oh, you're weak, or you're lazy, or you're, these words like dirty, like, words that we associate with drug use, words that we associate with chronic drug use, especially, actually, right? Like typically. And it's like a framework of that versus like, and then even with a medical framework of saying like, okay, so we're going to use cannabis to help with this, instead of being like, I'm using cannabis to cure my CPTSD. That's not true. Like, I will never cure that. I'm going to carry that for my life. I will continue to process that as things come up forever. It's going to be good. It continues to get better, but it is a lot. It's a lot. I'm not going to cure that. There's no cure for that. That's who I am. That's what my life has been. That's not changing. But what is changing is my ability to accommodate myself to have a high quality of life, right? Is my ability to like use cannabis as medicine to help with that, not cure it, but to make my life better and honestly make it worth living in ways because of chronic pain and GI things and stuff. Like, cannabis is life-saving for that. And it really makes sense in that context. Now, I think that a lot of people who research cannabis lack the perspective of having struggled with substance use in other sectors. I think they lack the perspective of having friends who have struggled with substance use. They lack the perspective of having friends who are unhoused or being unhoused. Or it's not, I'm not saying that for all scientists. It's not everyone. It's not everywhere. I'm just saying that, like, for many and for a majority of that culture, they're distanced and separated from the culture with which they are trying to study from the outside. And studying us from the outside, you're going to get a different perspective than from the inside. And yeah, there's a phrase that is from the disability rights advocacy movement, and it's nothing about us without us. And I think it very much so applies to this community because the community of cannabis consumers, the daily consumers, whether we consider ourselves rec or medical, like adult use or medical, and I would argue that daily consumers are almost always medical. Someone recently was like, what if I'm telling you I'm doing it just because I want to get high and I love getting high every day, devil's advocate. And I was like, you know what? I love that for you. And I still think it's improving your quality of life. And that's why you're choosing to do it. And that's the point of a medicine, like, I mean, and from that framework, it's like, medical quality, like medical advocacy.
Or at least, if we didn't define it as like strictly, because then let's talk about the concern if we call everything medical. Are we worried about how we'll legislate then?
I don't know if there's a problem with that. I kind of feel like Cali Prop 215 beat out adult use in the ways that I felt about quality. But that was only my experience, and I was only there for a couple of years, and then I was in my PhD, and then I came back, and I was like, whoa, this is like way different. Like,
yeah.
Whoa. Like, it has been a few years, really, really rapidly too. And I don't know. I mean, like, I have complicated opinions and feelings about that because, like, I don't have a medical card right now. I will get one before my next grow gets going so I can increase my plants. But yeah, I don't have one right now. It's a lapsed one. I don't want to pay for one, and it's difficult. It's complicated because, like,
super complicated.
It's a complicated argument, and I would argue that if we said everything's medical, quote unquote, saying like, okay, everything's medical, the answer to that is that this medicine shouldn't be regulated. I mean, but that's like a whole another thing, right?
Yeah.
This is like a whole other thing. This medicine should be regulated. Like, right? Yeah. And that would never happen.
It's because it's already written. It's hard to walk it back. How do you see what you're doing with NAP and getting all that consumer data and doing all these studies, how do you see that helping to alleviate the situation?
I mean, what we're really trying to do is twofold. Like, one of the things that we want to do is to document our community from the inside and from our own perspectives, and document priorities and reflect those priorities in the things that we do, so that then it sparks other things, right? Like, we don't necessarily, like, we're putting things in through the peer review process, and we definitely are interested in doing scientific research and talking to other scientists. I'm just saying how much I love meeting other scientists here at MJ Biz. We're really passionate about talking to the people, and that is a very intentional, it's very intentional, because I think that the most important conversations are not between a scientist and someone learning. The most important conversations are not between someone who wants to learn something, like, it's not between me and someone else. The most important conversations are at a dinner table. Or the most important conversations are like in a car ride where someone's complaining about, like, oh man, I just had this like crazy neck pain or something. And then you're like, oh, I actually have a topical on me. Like, are you curious about that? You know, and they're like, topical, what, you know, lotion, a salve or something, you know, and then they try it on and then they love it. And then they're like, oh, tell me more about that. Right. And like, you know, so I have formed so many relationships through this with cannabis, right? Like the introduction of it, like the medicine and the quality. And I think that is important. Those conversations within our personal lives are more impactful and can change the stigma in more ways than necessarily a scientist to scientist conversation, which is amazing. But most of us are on the same page about medical quality. Most of us are on the same page about what we should be researching to understand more and to better improve and optimize, like not just one thing, but like a good number of things that we could be understanding more and not know about cannabis. But, you know, there's a huge disconnect from the general public. Like, I think that like a lot of people who are more naive don't understand that there is a giant difference in quality in flower alone, let alone all of the other products. I mean, every single product on the market, there is a wide disparity, in my opinion, right? And
there is.
Yes, in quality.
It's not even, and you look at what you're getting on the store shelf, and even through testing, the breeders were even saying from one plant to the next, even when you're trying to use the same genetics, there's wild variability. I mean, that's just working in natural products. And that's like, before we even touch it.
Right. And then but I think that like the other thing, it's quality. So one part is the quality that we're not aware, the disparity quality, and so public education is lacking. And when public education is lacking, the market is driven by like stupidity, because there's I'm sorry.
That's so true.
Okay. It's just lack of better terms for the fact that like when the general public who is purchasing the most massive amount within the legal industry, like I don't know what the statistics would be for that, but I'm throwing it out there that most people that are really, really involved and educated, like a lot of us grow our own or are very well connected, like, or grow our own and then therefore are well connected from that. Right? Like, and the push to get to that or to do that, like, I mean, it's a large percentage. I'm just saying it's a large percentage of people who then eventually, like, this evolution of understanding of like of the plant and the appreciation of it. And I'm not saying that can't be had, but what I'm saying is that it's complicated when the general public doesn't know and understand even like the differences between some of these things because of all the propaganda, and then because of the marketing.
The marketing doesn't help when we only give half of the information.
But we can't also, we're also like tied to not being able to say a lot of the things that we should be able to say. And like the complications of being like a medical claim for this, it's like, yeah, but have you seen a commercial on like average, like, you know, Tuesday night on cable TV? You're like, you know, you're scrolling through your streaming thing and you're like seeing which commercials are gonna pull up, and then like, you know, you see a commercial, and yes, those claims are validated by a clinical system of evaluation that like has a ton of rigor there, right? But why can't there be an alternative form or alternative method specifically for cannabis, right? Or we could even invent our own, where it's like, well, yeah, we can disclose this because we are anyways. So it's like that fact that, you know what I mean? Like, we're all disclosing it to each other all the time, always.
Yeah, someone else had mentioned some kind of grading system we could possibly develop in the future to actually score like this is, you know, a 5 grade. I don't know how, I don't want to say 5-star or 3-star, because then we're arguing about like just like food and restaurants, like who gets the Michelin. It's kind of subjective. It's also like who's good. And then it's also a little bit of marketing. Michelin is a tire. Like it was done for road trips across America to get Americans were into driving and to get them driving across America. And they developed the Michelin system to get them to buy tires. Your fancy restaurants are all about driving.
That's
you know?
really interesting. I
That's
wonder
how it started.
Is
but
that
now
why they're
look
not
at
in
it.
Massachusetts? Because driving sucks in Boston.
I have no idea. I mean, now it's grown well beyond just the tires, you know, but that's like in that, I don't know when Michelin started. It might have been in the 40s or 50s or even before then.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But it had a lot to do, the Michelin star. Like Michelin started before the 40s and 50s, but the Michelin star, go to a city that has Michelin star restaurant, that began as a tour of food that was really driven by a tire company's desire to get people out there traveling so they would buy more tires. Like it's kind of, have you seen anything like that playing out in cannabis where we enter in one direction and we leave in a completely different? Because regardless of tires or not, if you're a Michelin star restaurant, it means something. Like there's a whole new reality that's been created.
Yeah, I don't know necessarily about like in terms of like the exact analogy of like this, but one thing I see as something that makes a lot of sense in terms of like the marketing of something that then like leads to something else is that since we're unable to give any like things like this will help with this, it is my perspective that I really enjoy companies that invest in public education as part of their marketing because they are investing in their consumer base and giving back something to their consumer base because they trust that they themselves are going to make quality that then their consumer base will still consume. Now, I respect that because a company that is prioritizing like, for example, like we have data about, you know, this is so strange. This could just be a correlation. This correlation versus causation, which, you know, if I want to come back and go down a rabbit hole, I will talk about cannabis and psychosis about that. But when you look at the level of impairment or disability, going back to that original data set I was saying, where daily cannabis consumers have increased levels of like impairment. There's kind of like a pattern that is over here where it's like there's like kind of clusters of people, and it was interesting. But like then in our longitudinal data set, there are clusters of dose groups as well amongst daily consumers. And I only analyzed in extreme detail, me and Riley so far. I was trying to figure out which one of us was which, and it took me a long time actually. But the variability between people is quite extreme. Like within daily consumers, like I like to think that I consume almost the same amount every day, and there is a base routine there, but actually it does vary very very widely. And I think that it's interesting, and that there's a place here in terms of marketing and cannabis, and what I like to see, and where I think there's a place here for is that there is a way to not necessarily have it be an only medical focus while still also talking about things that have to do with medical quality or medical grade,
but aren't necessarily medical.
Well, because like you don't have to say medical quality and medical grade like this. It's good or it's not, right? This is good. These are good.
It's supposed to be.
These are good.
It's at least safe.
They're goods or they're mids, right? I mean, the safety thing is complicated. Let's be real.
But if you're on that medical level, it's
absolutely important. But do we think that testing is like going well? It's like that's complicated. So that's very, very hard. Testing labs not only struggle, but then also some of them are falsifying their data. Like some of them are not the distribution of the results. This comes from Dr. Jeff Rawson's work at the Institute, the Canna Science Institute. But you know, there's a normal distribution of data points. If in any big data set, there's typically what's called a Gaussian distribution. It's just like, you know, an average. It just looks like this. It's like a average curve. And in labs that push test results, Dr. Rawson saw that there was not a
anomaly in
Gaussian
statistical distribution that didn't look like
Right.
what it should.
but it's just it's like and that's just one of the issues, right? Then there's like emerging pesticides and things that we couldn't possibly know to test for and then untargeted, and there's scientific reasons why this is difficult. Okay, untargeted analysis is not a routine. Like,
Well, let's talk about that. Like,
like,
there's several areas in cannabis where scientific analysis is exceptionally difficult. What are the spaces in the year looking ahead where you're hoping to receive more, not just support, but more development so that you can expand what you're doing?
I'm really interested in looking more at molecular mechanism. And I think that's one of the things that's real. There's a couple things that are really interesting. I mean, there's a million things that are interesting about cannabis and the endocannabinoid system. I shouldn't just be like one or a couple. It's endless. But I do think that it's a fat-based signaling system is unique because of the chemistry of fats and lipids. And so when I mean that is that people think of fats, you think of like olive oil or butter. Now, what those things are is they're long chains made up of just carbon. And cannabis, like you look at THC molecule, it's almost all black carbon. There's like a few oxygens, there's two, right? So it's very fatty. And the molecules in our bodies that are very fatty, and it makes sense that it's fatty. Like think about what resin looks like and feels like. It's sticky. It's more like butter than it is like salt water. Yes, like so. It's hard to. It's fascinating, but it's hard to study. Lipid chemistry is difficult, and it's fascinating because the lipids are in our membranes and are part of every receptor, not just the CB1 receptor, not just the CB2 receptor. The lipids within our membrane and the lipid fluidity and the texture of our membrane affects our receptor signaling, and we know this. That's actually one of the known changes that happens in psychopharmaceuticals will be cholesterol levels that exist within the fatty membrane. Now, that fatty membrane is where all the endocannabinoids come from. And phytocannabinoids like CBD and THC that are really, really fatty, they can be in binding proteins and stuff, but largely they will be solubilized like in fat because they're fat. Fats are soluble in fat. Like soluble meaning like they can be dissolved. So like if you dissolve like oil and vinegar shall not be mixed, but like ethanol can mix with both of them, right? Like to a certain extent. And like I think that when it comes to what we have yet to explore and what would be really, really exciting to look at is a combination of molecular mechanism, chemical diversity, and sort of the ability to start building snapshots of understanding how that actually leads to differences in biological activities, how that actually leads to potentially changes of surface tension or membrane fluidity, right? And then being able, there's going to be a big black box here, but then be able to extrapolate that to then seeing what people are experiencing, right? Now, there's always going to be a black box between the theoretical biochemistry that's done in a test tube, like the stuff that you put the pipettes like this. It's like it's not even a test tube. It's usually a plate, and it's less than like it's less than like a drop of water, and that's very small. And you create this experiment, you look at it, and it's great. And then there's going to be a big black box where you're like, we don't know. And then there's going to be the human experience. Like what it is that we experience over here, because there's a huge amount of things that have to come between here. But the thing is, if you're only getting one side, you're only getting the biochemistry, or you're only getting the human experience, that black box is infinite on the other side. And so for us, if we get both of them, at least that black box is contained, and you can start to like build in ways to visualize and draw conclusions from how we can look at this in a different way. Because something that Dr. Riley Kirk and I have been working on a lot for a long time, we keep being like, oh, we're almost done writing it, but we're not. We're still evolving it. But it's this theory on chemical diversity and drug discovery, like very specifically what we both studied, which is the very first steps in drug discovery, in pharmaceutical drug discovery. So Riley looked at like lead in new molecules, identifying new molecules from natural plant icons and finding potential molecules that are beneficial. And then I looked at how do those molecules actually do anything, and is there a therapeutic mechanism at play inside the body to cause any sorts of effects. Now, for the history of pharmacology, which is pretty young, people don't know, it's only like 100 years old. It's not that old, maybe 200 years old at the oldest, depending on what you're considering the first drug, or like the first like synthetic. And this has always been about one molecule it has always been about studying one at a time. You have to. I mean, in many ways, I understand why that's mandatory, but also in many ways, it doesn't actually make sense. Not in terms of like being able to draw a conclusion of knowing exactly what is happening, because that's the reason why science works with one molecule, one ibuprofen, like
Right.
and it makes it simpler. There's only one thing, but the
Plus variability.
right? And then, but the problem is that like with cannabis, with natural products, there's so much else there.
It's
there's
like
so much
variability
more
built in.
and that variability, that chemical diversity, the amount of things that are there, that is a potential therapeutic advantage. Now, we don't know whether it's always there or whatnot, or which pieces of it are causing that synergy. We don't know whether there's synergy there that is non-specific. So what I mean by that is like, it's not two molecules that work really well together. It's like groups of them that happen to work well together on like, there's different scales that these molecules can work within our body, right? Like when I'm usually talking about the level of research I do, it's at a one molecule to one target thing, like one THC for one CB1 receptor. Like that's the average way of like my field of like visualizing like the level of structural biochemistry. But you could zoom out and there's different levels of that where you say like, okay, talking about membrane fluidity, that's one step out where you're saying like this, there's that level of change. And you know, these are potential advantages that we've never looked at, and just because we can't quantify them in the way that we used to compare to pharmaceuticals doesn't mean that we shouldn't begin to try to quantify them now in a new way that they could be related to each other.
So like with the research that you're doing when you're trying to quantify relatability, what are some of the things that are like hitting a couple notes? Like what are you noticing about what patterns are you seeing emerge?
Okay, something that was interesting was that at like equal volume components, that there was like strain specificity at the endocannabinoid enzymes, or at least there was clear variability between different strains, or the aromatic profile of different strains on these enzymes within our body that break down endocannabinoids. And it does, and it does make sense. And then I mean, you backtrack it, and then again, like these are things that probably, when you think about it, like, yeah, it makes sense, because then you look at the composition of even just the aroma fraction. That's only one component of what's in flower. And there's only one component, and it's a bigger component in concentrates, actually. So like that's another interesting thing there, right? That just that difference in ratio that we still have yet to understand. Now, there are unexplored therapeutic benefits there. There are unexplored therapeutic benefits in clearly a combination or a synergy of things, and there's not an answer that's so clear here of saying like, oh, okay, we're going to prove that natural products are better in this direction. It's like, no, we don't have to prove anything. Natural products are good and they work, and in so many ways they are a way better thing for a lot of different people, and that's like without a doubt like fact. And
you're developing them, or you're helping to contribute to the research to do it right.
Everyone has things that works for them. And I believe very much so that synthetics and pharmaceuticals have their place, save lives, and are definitely part of people's routines. But they're not superior.
And they're not the only option.
And they don't have all of the advantages. By being synthetic and isolated, it is possible that there is a disadvantage of the way that we have been doing drug discovery versus natural products.
They're saying that with psilocybin, that when they try to extract or just get the thing that gives the therapeutic benefit but not the experience of a psychedelic trip, that people aren't exactly, it's not landing the same. It doesn't hit the same.
I am not interested in that. Zero interest.
I can understand
maybe
why.
Negative interest. I don't know.
For me, I understand it, but then for someone who is needing, if psilocybin provides some kind of therapeutic potentiality and they don't need to be tripping all the time,
definitely,
then I can kind of see it's worth at least the discovery and the exploration of it. So as you guys are wrapping up 2024 and heading into 2025 with all the research that's on the horizon, you're right, we're just scratching the surface. Like we were just talking about psilocybin, but there's other opportunities. Like you mentioned aroma, and there's new papers and studies coming about different pieces of the plant that we weren't 100. We thought we knew everything, but there was so much more to learn. What are some of the projects we can look forward to from NAP on the horizon, where you guys are digging deeper and you're uncovering things that perhaps the industry hasn't fully understood?
I think it's like more about not uncovering things that we haven't understood, but maybe just like asking questions that no one has thought or cared to have asked our community in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we've been really excited about and that this year has been just really great is understanding science advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
And what I bring it back to what I was saying about public education and the value of public education and bringing that into our markets, is that we all need to be on the same page if we're going to advocate for things that we do believe in and that we need. And I think that like having the information to be able to go to a city council or to be able to go to your doctor or something, and to be able to have some true feeling of understanding, trust, and the ability to then communicate someone else like a piece of information that is not just from your own lived experience, but is a reflection of the community, and you see yourself in the community in there. Those are the things that we're really excited to continue next year and to grow next year and to understand is how can we use our data? How can we go to communities, empower other communities who want to research what they like, want to ask questions maybe and frame research. And then how can we take that and understand how that information reflects things that maybe should be so. So an example of this is our data point from our longitudinal study about medical patients. A majority of the daily consumers considered their use medical, a huge majority, but only a really small fraction had medical cards, even though a majority lived in medical states. Yes.
Right.
So that data point indicates...
Well, even living in a medical state doesn't mean you have actual access.
True.
Right?
And there's restrictions depending on which the states are also varied, and that's complicated.
So what does your findings show?
Well, so I think an interesting thing it might show is that that medical systems need to be reevaluated in some ways, because if the medical system was serving the medical population, all of us who were medical would have medical cards.
Right.
If there was benefits, like if it was covered by our health insurance, or like if it was a regular PCP doctor visit that was kind of like more routine or more integrated within there's all these like reductions to barrier of entry, which there's actually tons of really pretty easy ways to be able to access it if you are interested in being a medical patient, but even understanding at a state level, what are the benefits of medical patients? Like, what benefits do you receive? In many states, it can go with home grow, right? And understanding that, but, or at least for me, it's like number of plants. And I think it's one of those things that's really interesting is that, our community, I felt really like a lot of people have felt empowered by the things that I say. And there's a lot of people that have said, have expressed the sentiment like that, like, oh my gosh, to see someone say this, to see what the research shows, and that like I'm a part of that, it's like, and none of this is new. These are all things that we've been saying for a really long time, but to be able to speak a language and show something and have it not be just like a hearsay, which is, I don't think that that's right, but that is just the way that it is. It helps add validity to our movement as a whole. So the more that we're able to understand and look at data as a way to highlight things like that, and to maybe like readjust and say like, look, like, and be like, just have a thought, like that data point is just a data point, but what it reflects is something that a bunch of different things that we maybe should reevaluate with. And we definitely shouldn't just leave it the same, right? Like,
No.
I don't know. It's complicated though. A lot of those state level groups are underfunded and understaffed, and then a lot of times I kind of feel like we're overregulated.
Yeah.
We're overregulated.
Well, then for 2025, understanding that we are overregulated and all the other complications that you mentioned about trying to break through new science, what is your big audacious goal for the next year as far as your research and the stuff you're working on?
Oh, the biggest goal, 2025. Let's see, 2025. The biggest goal that would be really cool would be to get a second evolution of some of our longitudinal studies and our more niche surveys out there, because like essentially we took this initial data set and have had some initial analyses and have basically seen like there's with anything like this, you start and you see the information and you're like, wow, I have a million more questions and I wish I had structured this question. I answered this one, or I like, you know, like, because like this question actually brought up this whole other thing, and like
we have follow-up questions now.
And there's so many more things that are more specific. And so I think that's going to be a really exciting thing. And in terms of like public education and coursework, earlier this year, I put out the Neurodivergent Brain on Drugs course. And I'm starting to do extra credit courses that are very specific. So like my first one is going to be on Ehlers-Danlos. And I have a whole course on autism and cannabis, and I'm writing one on ADHD. And cannabis. Although if you've seen my Neurodivergent Brain on Drugs course, I generally use neurodivergent, but that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be specialized lectures towards neurotypes that gravitate, right? Because like CBG has been incredibly helpful for my focus. And I very much so identify as an ADHD neurodivergent person that displays both autism and ADHD in different ways. And sometimes that cancels out and then you mask better, and that's confusing because it's like you're masking better, but you are more confused inside. And cannabis and understanding like how to dose with each of these things, like, you know, to be able to gather information and understand more about that, like by teaching these courses, by empowering and by doing public education and by building a community of people who have this bigger foundational amount of knowledge, we have this much greater exchange at an exponential level of what is working for us. Like the general feedback that I've gotten from, you know, X amount of things, I think the biggest data set part is from the Neurodivergent Cannabis Survey, which is also in the white paper data set, where people just wrote back their responses. I was just like, share something if you want. And so many people shared very detailed and very specific things that work for them. And I think it's really interesting because when it comes to CBD and THC ratios, there were like clear little buckets of like ranges, right? There's what I would call the hemp range, which is like 20-1 CBD to THC. And so I would say that's like the hemp range. It's much more CBD than THC. Then there's this like 4-5 to CBD to THC ratio, which is like super kind of mellow. Then there's like a 1-to-1 situation going on, and then there's like all THC. And these are just like really common. They're really common
You're
genetic
just seeing
profiles.
common bubbles of how people are consuming.
Yeah, and they're also common ratios that we see in the market. So there's that too, but people consume them for specific reasons, and they're common. Like, because it makes sense though. You want a more mellow experience for mellow experiences, or when it's
intuitive.
Yeah,
a bit intuitive, but now we're finding ways to actually like record what are.
And that would be the big goal. Yeah, and that would be the big overarching goal. I doubt 2025 is the year to
there's
to get
so
that goal.
much.
But to be able to contribute, to start to build into that goal, to be able to like start to understand within these niches, and like what I was saying, within like using data as advocacy, or understanding what we're trying to get out of this information that would help us. Not with research. I mean, yes, help us with research, but help us as a community move forward into like deeper understandings of what even it is that we should be focused on. And also, when we're doing this, sometimes we come across other roadblocks that you never would expect. And like, I think our science of smokability study is an example of that, where when Dr. Kirk and Dr. Justice went to run the combustion machine using the Health Canada protocol, they were looking at it and they were like, this is not at all like anyone who smokes a joint. Like, this protocol is not reflective.
But when the method in the lab doesn't actually reflect what's going to happen in real life,
right?
How trusted can the data be if it's those variables are different?
And so, then we're instead going to set up to do like our to collect that puff topography and make a new method. And like
puff topography.
Yeah, that's the puff profile.
For like, let us know, where can we find more on the science of smokability, like puff topography, and the projects that you are working on, and how can people participate?
Yeah, so going to our website, appliedpharmacognosy.org, which I have to send you a link because pharmacognosy is a and also for people, I don't know if Riley talked about it in her episode, but pharmacognosy is the precursor to pharmaceutical sciences. So pharmacognosy is a study of chemically diverse natural products, and cannabis is absolutely one of those. And yes, and so going to our website, you can sign up for our email list, and then we send out email newsletters that have data shares and research opportunities and stuff like that. We actually just have published online this journal from a summary of our findings from the last year, and that's at appliedpharmacognosy.org/journal, and it'll just be up there, open for download. It's free for anyone who wants to see it. We do have physical copies too, and it's sort of like a summary of what were these big goals, and where we are hoping to take each of these projects next and grow them. Because for each of them that we started, there's a way in which they continue to grow and evolve and continue to report back and then be reported back in terms of like giving information back to the community, seeing that response, making slight changes and in the future studies, and then releasing that data and then hearing the response and having it be a more communicative dialogue back and forth with our community, which is the goal and what we're aiming for. And definitely something that is like takes a lot of effort, and it's a different approach because you have to prioritize things a little bit differently when your priority is the impact to the people and not necessarily like what is the protocol that's been published before for peer review that will then get you published into a peer review, because it is easier to publish things in peer review that have already been published in peer review. Right.
But is it really moving the needle?
But it's hard. Like, is it about moving the needle? That's the question. Is everything about moving the needle? And the answer is no, but the answer is for us, yes.
Right now it really needs to be considering like where we are legislatively
yes.
But in the future it can be a little bit more relaxed.
I think that we are needing to continue to push here because because there's like future discovery and potentiality that is unknown. I'm with you on that. I think there's just a chance for us to optimize it to the point where people don't have to have bad experiences, and not even that we have a very clear understanding of unique benefits of it, because there are people within our community at NAP, members of NAP, who I think are volunteers that we're working on documenting lived experiences of strain specificity, because there are people who have epilepsy, have seizure disorders, and there are people who have migraine. There are people who have extremely, extremely specific things. Actually, Riley was talking about GMO. Did Riley talk about the GMO and the headaches? But GMO specifically for Riley is very helpful for that, and I think that that's really fascinating. And it's not that's not rare, right? Like, and a lot of medical patients grow because of this developed, like, sort of like
intuitive
niche
knowing of what they need,
of what you need, and then needing to find just that thing that makes it work. Now, I don't think that we'll ever replace the plant. I don't think that the plant is ever going to be the same from here to here to here to here to here. Like, that's not the goal here. But the goal is to be able to give people baselines of starting off of what would work or wouldn't work for one thing, and to identify and optimize for unique needs, like chronic pain. Like, I have a lot of joint pain, and sometimes cannabis makes my joint pain worse. Definitely high THC. Cannabis specifically, it almost like makes my whole body ache, and sometimes that's associated with induced hypothermia. My body will get cold and I'll like shake and be cold while my joints are hurting and stuff like that. But then other strains are like, they have that sweet release of my joint pain, and I'm just, and it's great.
And it's getting to the point where you can more easily predict what your experience is going to be with a consistent product.
Definitely. And the consistent product, and the being able to understand what it is that we need to be able to test and visualize. The testing is so that we could know for the chemistry and the science, and that's for us. I'm excited about the testing. But the visualization of it and the ability to communicate to other people like how that is and how that works, first of all, we have to be able to find we're going to have to be able to find and identify them first. But like, let's say, okay, so how about this? Every time I meet someone who's a lot like me, I know what they like. I'm like, there's a lot of stuff going on here.
We have our patterns.
Yeah, like I think that there's a common thread here amongst like people with a lot of chronic pain, CPTSD, like TBI, like all of the stuff that I have.
Or there's some commonality with how those things are affecting the ECS or the endocannabinoid system.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that you'll find that a lot of people who are in that niche of like severe chronic pain, like really intense PTSD, like then TBI is another example, but like these really like kind of like great needs that have a high dose schedule type things.
And it doesn't affect them at all.
And are
like they're like, how can you smoke that much? And you're like, what are you talking about? I'm just at base level.
Yeah, and it's like, I mean, I still can get really high school high. I could, but it's rare, right? Like, and I think that
we were less traumatized now.
But I think that the gravitation towards things that are very similar is interesting because people that are like me tend to be very overstimulated and want to be way less and are better functionally when like the cannabis is in that very calming and more like sedating state. Now for me also, I like aged products. That's actually the number one way that I've found to avoid the like things that I don't like the body aching. So like aged products never make my body hurt ever. That's not to say maybe I guess
new to research.
And not aged like left out, aged like gross and old, like aged like with care and intention.
Right, like wine, like something.
And that's
delicious.
something else that we don't. I don't see that anywhere. I don't know that I could see that anywhere. Aren't there expiration date? Are there expiration? They're like I haven't seen it anywhere, and I'm wondering if there's a reason why.
Aged,
like hash.
Probably because everybody. Well, actually, I'm curious why we haven't seen that. But as far as flower, because
flower, yeah, let's not.
Because we can, and with hash, maybe it just goes too fast. Maybe we're just consuming too fast to think to like age it for a bit. I'm not sure. I'm not a hash maker. Like when I retire and I can dedicate some time to the art of it. But we'll find out. We're gonna have to get someone who makes hash on here so they can tell us.
Honestly, that's something
I bet you they are. I bet that's the other thing about just being here in the synchronicity and having conversations like this is that we learn how much we don't know. And someone somewhere out there is probably asking the same question, and how nice it is to gather us all together to start to figure out some of these answers. So I do have to give MJ Biz a shout out for that, bringing everybody together. And while Weed Week here in Vegas has definitely expanded well beyond just the conference center and the strip, and there's so much going on, what's really giving a lot of hope right now is that we're all asking more questions and starting to. The pattern seems to be, or the thing that I've heard a lot from the industry through the week, is that we're really starting to realize that that cutthroat competition thing isn't going to work. And we're looking at more collaborative processes that can elevate everybody in the right place at the right time, using what their skill set or specialty is without having to take away from anybody else. It's kind of an amazing thing that we're getting to.
I love that. I mean, teamwork. We are the Network of Applied Pharmacognosy, and we've always wanted to accelerate things by working with people in that synergy. I think that you can always get more done with more hands.
Way more.
And with specialized hands as well. Like having no interest of taking over someone else's niche because you're like, I'm contributing to that and they're contributing in their way. And what you mentioned about hash is something I actually want to say that I am really excited about in terms of like chemical work that's like bench work or lab work, is that we are really excited to start doing research more on hash. It's just in the beginning stages of understanding washing. I mean, this is an art. It takes a really long time to understand. There's so many different variables and so many different processes, but we're really excited to start looking more into things in hash, and just in the process of making hash and being more experienced with it ourselves. And so
if you're a hash maker out there, although I know you guys have on the board, you have the Dank Duchess is on the board.
Oh, definitely.
Of NAP. So
Duchess has come and showed me a wash in my basement, and I have not yet done one on my own, but Dr. Kirk and I are going to do one and start to even just begin to write down like the questions within just our initial test.
Kind of piecing together what you want to explore.
And I think we have to take the information from everyone as well. So in terms of hash makers, there's no shortage of people that we could ask about things that they've always wanted to know about the chemistry.
That sounds like we're manifesting for 2025. If you make hash, you might want to look into connecting with Riley and Miyabe. So
love a good hash connection.
As we finish hashing it out, What's one word that's guiding you into the new year and your final thoughts?
One word.
Yeah.
That's a hard one. I think it's certainty.
Certainty. I like that. Highly analytical. Like, how do you get to certainty?
I think you have to be certain. I think to be an advocate in this space and to be a medical advocate, especially for what I advocate for, I think I have to be certain. I had to be certain that even though there's so much unknown in all the science that not just that I do, but all the science that everyone does, there's a lot of unknown.
Going back
in there.
Validating.
A lot of unknown. Yeah. And there's a beauty of that. You're never going to like fully get that. But I guess moving to 2025, like the reason I'm coming to certainty is because like I am certain though that something's happening here. I'm certain. I think a lot of people feel it. And it's good. I don't think that it's also scary and change and transition. And, there's like, some of us struggle with transition, but so there's a lot of that going on.
Most people struggle with transition.
And so there's this excitement though too. And it's hard. This hasn't been easy. Like you said about the last 5 years, like this is not an easy industry to be in. It's not an easy space to be in, but I do think that there's more certainty. Like what you were saying about even the collaboration, like there's feelings that we're all more certain about how we're going to move into this together and how we're going to do this together. And like, at least for me personally, within my own journey, like being more certain as not just an advocate, but a scientist, but like the purpose of what it is that I do and why it is that I do it and what the impact is of that. How important is that to me and to other people, and being certain of that.
Ooh, it sounds like certain or confident.
I like that. Yeah.
I like it. Confidence. Well, I am confident we are out of time. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, it was great.
I'm so delighted to be here filming with you. I met you at my first MJ Biz, and I think it might have been your first a while back too. And now look at how far we are. Certain that things are going to improve. Thank you so much, Dr. Shields. I appreciate you. And for all of you out there listening, don't forget to stay highly informed. And as always, stay elevated out there.